Hello and welcome back. Tonight, we're going to walk quietly into one of the strangest corners of World War II history, a place where science, desperation, myth, and ambition all began to melt together into something almost dreamlike, or perhaps more accurately, nightmarish. Maybe you're listening late at night, with the lights low, or maybe you simply feel like letting the past sit beside you for a while. However you've arrived here, I'm glad you did, because what we're about to explore isn't just a story about technology. It's a story about human belief and what happens when leaders truly convince themselves that salvation can be engineered in metal and flame. As Germany's war effort began to collapse, its leaders turned more and more toward Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. Weapons that, at least in their minds, would be so advanced, so unimaginable, that they would change the fate of the war in a single decisive moment. Some of these machines were very real, some existed only as prototypes, some lived only in drawings, memos, or fevered imagination, and a few have become legends, wrapped tightly in rumor and mystery. Tonight we'll walk through all of them, slowly, calmly, carefully, because this story matters, not only for what it reveals about the past, but because it shows us the lengths people will go to when they believe defeat is approaching like a storm on the horizon. Let's begin with something real, something loud, something that could be heard before it could be seen. The V-1 flying bomb. Imagine standing in a London street in 1944. You look up, and you hear a strange buzzing sound, like a motorcycle engine echoing across the sky. People described it as harsh, mechanical, unnatural. The sound didn't fade like an airplane passing overhead. It droned, constant, ominous. And then, the engine stopped. In that silence, everyone knew what came next. The V-1 was the world's first operational cruise missile, a pilotless aircraft launched from ramps across occupied Europe, guided only by a crude autopilot. When its fuel ran out, it simply fell, wherever gravity chose. It was not precise. It was not surgical. It was terror delivered by machine. Thousands were fired. Thousands landed among homes. For the first time, cities realized that war could come from the sky, without a human being attached to it. The future had just knocked on the world's door, and it would not leave. But the V-1 was only a beginning. Hidden beneath mountains and forests, German engineers worked on something unprecedented. The V-2 ballistic missile. This wasn't a plane. This wasn't even a bomb in the traditional sense. This was the world's first long-range rocket weapon. It rose vertically in a pillar of fire, climbed beyond the clouds, and briefly left Earth's atmosphere before arcing downward toward its target at supersonic speed. It arrived silently. There was no warning siren, no engine tone, just the explosion. People later said, if you heard it, you were safe. Because the ones that killed you, you never heard at all. And here is the uncomfortable truth. This terrible weapon was also the ancestor of every space rocket ever launched. After the war, the scientists who designed it were dispersed across the world. Their knowledge became the foundation of peaceful space programs and the nuclear missile systems that still exist today. Progress and destruction forever intertwined. Now let's step into the cockpit of something else entirely. The world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt, Me-262. Sleek, fast, futuristic. To Allied pilots used to propellers and piston engines, the jet must have seemed like something from another world. It could accelerate past them effortlessly and disappear into the clouds before they could react. For a brief moment, it looked as though the jet age might rewrite the skies. But reality has a way of pushing back. The engines were fragile. They burned out quickly. Fuel was scarce. Pilots were increasingly young and inexperienced. Airfields were bombed relentlessly. The future had arrived. But it arrived in a house already collapsing. A glimpse of what was to come, but not yet ready to stand on its own. Now we move from weapons that flew to one that mostly existed as ambition, the Amerika-Bomber. The idea was breathtaking in scope. A long-range aircraft capable of taking off from Europe, crossing the Atlantic, striking the United States, and then returning home. Several designs were proposed. Some prototypes were tested, a few even flew impressively long distances. But the gap between theory and reality was simply too wide. Fuel consumption, engine reliability, navigation accuracy, industrial capacity, pilot endurance, all stood in the way, and yet the dream persisted, revealing how far Nazi planners had drifted from reality. Even as their own cities lay in ruins, they imagined striking across an ocean they no longer controlled. Sometimes, fantasy is not an escape from fear. It is born from it. And now, we begin to cross the threshold where science meets speculation. Among the files seized by Allied investigators after the war was a proposal for something extraordinary. A giant orbiting mirror placed in space, capable of focusing sunlight into a destructive beam directed at Earth. It became known as the Sun Gun. No prototype was ever built, no materials gathered, no factory assigned. It was theoretical, speculative, more science fiction than war plan. But the fact that it reached paper at all, that respected engineers allowed their minds to wander toward cosmic weapons, reveals just how far the imagination had begun to drift from the battlefield. When defeat feels inevitable, the impossible starts to sound reasonable. And finally, we arrive at the greatest mystery of all, Die Glocke. The bell. A bell-shaped device, hidden underground, surrounded by secrecy. Depending on which version of the story you hear, it could distort gravity, bend time, or unlock alien technology. Some say its experiments ended in disaster. Others claim it was flown secretly to South America. Still others insist it never existed at all. So what does history really tell us? Very little. There are no confirmed photographs, no verified engineering diagrams, no surviving physical remains. Most accounts appear decades later. Memories blur, stories evolve, authors speculate, and yet the legend persists because mysteries have power, especially when placed in an already unbelievable historical setting. And perhaps that's the truth behind Die Glocke. It is less an object, and more a reflection of our desire to believe that history still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered. So what do these wonder weapons show us? They remind us that technology cannot replace strategy, that miracle weapons do not fix broken leadership, that science without ethics drifts toward darkness, and yet they also reveal something else, that human curiosity, even when twisted, never stops reaching forward. The same rockets that once fell upon cities would carry astronauts toward the moon. History is rarely clean. It rarely divides into good invention and bad invention. It simply unfolds, and we are left to decide what lessons to carry forward. In the end, the wonder weapons did not save the Third Reich. They arrived too late, in too few numbers, supported by too fragile an industry, driven by too desperate a leadership. But the stories they inspired, those lived on. Because we will always be drawn to tales of secret laboratories, hidden machines, and miracle technologies that might have changed everything, if only. And perhaps that is the quiet warning inside this history. When the present feels hopeless, we must be careful not to lose ourselves chasing miracles. Thank you for joining me tonight. If you enjoy slow, thoughtful journeys into the past, I'd be honored to have you stay with the channel. And as always, sleep well. And may history continue whispering its stories to you.